March 6, 1945, Cologne, Germany. A German Panther sits at an intersection near the cathedral, its gun already aimed. An American tank rounds the corner. Something new, something heavy. The German commander stares at a silhouette he has never seen. It does not look like a Sherman. He's certain it must be one of his own. In the seconds it takes him to understand his mistake, 3 90mm rounds tear through his armour. This is the story of the M26 Pershing, the American tank that could match any German heavy on the battlefield, but was blocked from production for nearly 3 years by one general's Doctrine. Only 20 reached Europe before the war ended. They killed Tigers, they helped capture the last standing bridge across the Rhine, and the general who stopped them never lived to see any of it. He was dead before the first Pershing fired a shot. The question is why? To understand why the Pershing reached the battlefield in February 1945 instead of mid-1944, you have to understand a doctrine that sounds perfectly logical until you count the dead. In 1941, the United States Army adopted the tank destroyer doctrine. Its principle was simple. American tanks were never supposed to fight enemy tanks. Tanks existed to support infantry and exploit breakthroughs. Enemy armour would be handled by specialised tank destroyer battalions, light, fast vehicles held in reserve and deployed like a fire brigade against armoured thrusts. Lieutenant General Lesley McNair, an artilleryman by training and commanding general of Army Ground Forces, championed this idea with total conviction. As long as McNair controlled equipment requirements, no American tank needed a gun capable of killing a Tiger, because no American tank was supposed to try. This logic held exactly as long as American tankers faced early Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs. It shattered the moment the Panther appeared. By mid-1943, Germany was mass-producing the Panther as its standard medium tank. 80mm of sloped frontal armour, a 75mm high-velocity gun that could destroy a Sherman at 2,000 yards. McNair dismissed the Panther as a rare specialty vehicle. He was wrong by an order of magnitude. The Ordnance Department, led by Major General Gladian Barnes, had been developing a 90mm armed replacement since 1942, the T-26 series. Barnes pushed for production. McNair blocked it. In a letter to General Marshall dated November 30, 1943, McNair wrote that there could be no basis for the T-26 except the idea of a tank versus tank duel, which he called unsound and unnecessary. He insisted the Sherman was the best tank on the battlefield and claimed even the enemy agreed. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers, head of the armoured force, disagreed violently. He took the extraordinary step of going over McNair's head directly to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall. On December 16, 1943, Marshall overruled McNair and authorised 250 T-26 tanks. But institutional resistance had consumed critical months. Production did not begin until November 1944. The Pershing was finally coming. But McNair would not be there to see it, and the way he died would haunt the doctrine he built. The weapon that McNair refused to build was in almost every respect exactly what American tankers needed. The Pershing's 90mm M3 gun was adapted from the M1 anti-aircraft gun, the American equivalent of Germany's famous 88. Its standard armour-piercing round could penetrate 150mm of steel at 500 yards, roughly matching the Tiger's own gun. But the scarce tungsten core round was devastating, 278mm at the same distance. For comparison, the Sherman's 75mm gun penetrated just 66mm. American tankers had spent 2 years firing at armour they could not pierce. The Pershing ended that equation overnight. Barnes and his team at the Ordnance Department obsessed over one specific engineering problem, the Sherman's height. The M4 stood nearly 9 feet tall, a barn-sized target on any battlefield, because its engine sat in the rear while its transmission and drive shaft ran underneath the fighting compartment to the front sprockets. Barnes insisted on a rear-engine, rear-transmission layout that eliminated the drive shaft entirely. The result dropped the Pershing's profile by more than a foot and lowered its centre of gravity, making it harder to hit and harder to tip on slopes. Beneath the hull, the Pershing introduced torsion bar suspension to American tank design. Long steel bars ran transversely inside the hull floor, each one absorbing road shock through controlled twisting rather than the crude volute springs on the Sherman. The ride was smoother. The tracks maintained better ground contact over rough terrain, and the system was mechanically simpler, fewer external components exposed to enemy fire. This suspension would become standard on every American tank built for the next 40 years, from the M26 Patton through the M60. The turret carried 102mm of cast armour on the front, compared to the Sherman's 64. The hull glacis was 102mm at 46 degrees. For the first time, an American tank crew could take a hit from a 75mm Panther round at combat range and survive. The Pershing was not invulnerable, but it was no longer a coffin. One detail reveals how seriously the Ordnance Department took the 90mm gun. During a training demonstration for Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the 3rd Armoured Division, Corporal Clarence Smoyer fired the Pershing's main gun while Rose stood just 50 feet away. The muzzle blast knocked Rose and his entire entourage off their feet. Smoyer hit a chimney at 1,200 yards, then another at 1,500. Rose brushed himself off and told Eisenhower that American gunnery was now far superior to the Germans. The gun had a voice, and it spoke with authority that no Sherman ever possessed. The weapon was ready. The question now was whether 20 tanks could prove what 250 might have settled months earlier. Of the first 40 T-26 E3s off the production line at Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, 20 were shipped to Europe and 20 went to Fort Knox for testing. They arrived at Antwerp, Belgium, in January 1945. Major General Barnes himself led the delivery, the Zebra technical mission, bringing civilian technicians to handle problems in the field. The tanks were split evenly, 10 to the 3rd Armoured Division and 10 to the 9th Armoured Division. Crews trained near Stolberg, east of Aachen. Each man fired 28 rounds. Then they went to war. The Pershing's first fight against a Tiger was a loss. On February 25th near the Ruhr River, a Tiger from Heavy Panzer Battalion 301 hit T-26, E3 number 38, nicknamed Fireball, 3 times at close range, killing 2 crewmen. But the Pershing absorbed 3 88mm rounds and was repaired and back in action within 9 days. A Sherman would have burned. The next afternoon changed everything. The title's promise was delivered at Elsdorf. Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonik commanded Pershing No. 40 with Task Force Lovelady. He had 12 confirmed kills since Normandy, all in Shermans. Now he had a weapon that matched his skill. Mashlonik scouted on foot and found a Tiger dug into a defensive position, roughly 1,000 yards away. He returned to his tank, took the gunner's position himself and ordered his driver to inch forward until the gun cleared the ridgeline. The Tiger was moving, exposing its thinner underside. Mashlonik's first tungsten round smashed its transmission. His second drilled through the gun mantlet, ricocheted into the hull and set it ablaze. 2 more rounds finished the crew. Minutes later, 3 Panzer IVs retreated along a road. Mashlonik waited until all 3 showed their rear armour and picked them off one by one. His words, just like shooting ducks. 4 kills in a single engagement. Pershing No. 40 became the highest scoring tank in the Zebra mission. A lot of these stories don't get told anywhere else. Subscribing helps make sure we can keep telling them. Now, back to the Pershing. The weapon's most famous moment came 10 days later at Cologne. Corporal Smoyer, now in Pershing Eagle 7, rounded a corner and found himself staring down the barrel of a Panther, commanded by an experienced officer who had already destroyed a Sherman minutes before. The German hesitated. He had never seen a Pershing and thought it was one of his own. 3 rounds in under a minute ended it. Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates captured every shot on 16mm film. 20 tanks. Confirmed kills against Tigers, Panthers and Panzer IVs within days. But the Pershing carried a flaw that its enemies never had to exploit, because time ran out first. The Pershing's honest weakness was its engine. The Ford GAF produced 500 horsepower, the same power plant that pushed the Sherman, now hauling a vehicle that weighed 26,000 pounds more. Off-road speed dropped to just over 5 miles per hour. The Torquematic transmission groaned under stress it was never designed to bear. The radiator, mounted behind the ammunition lockers against the engine firewall, overheated constantly, and the weight created a problem no amount of armour could solve: bridges. At 46 tons, the Pershing was too heavy for most European spans. At Remagen, where 4 Pershings from the 9th Armoured Division provided critical covering fire as infantry stormed the last intact bridge over the Rhine, the tanks themselves could not cross. They waited 5 days, then ferried across on pontoons lashed together in groups of 5. But this limitation was also the proof of what the Pershing was built to do. Every pound that made it too heavy for a bridge was a pound of armour keeping a 5-man crew alive. The Sherman crossed bridges easily, and burned easily too. The Pershing could not go everywhere, but where it went, its crews came back. In a war measured in burned-out hulls, that trade-off was worth every ton. The war ended before the Pershing could fight in numbers, but the weapon's story did not end with the surrender. 5 years after the last shot in Europe, the Pershing answered its critics in Korea. Facing Soviet-made T-34 tanks that had overrun American light armour, M26s were pulled off memorial pedestals at Fort Knox and reconditioned for combat. At the Battle of Obongni in August 1950, 4 Marine Pershings engaged 4 T-34s. A tungsten round from one M26 passed completely through a T-34, entering the front glacis and exiting the rear armour. 3 enemy tanks destroyed, 0 Pershings damaged. Master Sergeant Ernest Coomer earned the Medal of Honour commanding a Pershing at Ugok, holding a river crossing alone for 9 hours. Korea also confirmed the engine problem. Overheating transmissions and exhausted power plants forced the Pershing's withdrawal by mid-1951. But what replaced it was not a new design, it was the Pershing, evolved. The M46 pattern was a re-engined M26 with 810 horsepower. The M47 followed, then the M48, the definitive Cold War tank, then the M60, which served through Desert Storm. Over 36,000 Patton series tanks descended from the Pershing's torsion bar suspension, rear drive layout, and low-profile turret. They armed the free world for half a century. Every one of them carried the Pershing's mechanical DNA. Clarence Smoyer waited 74 years for his Bronze Star. Days after the Cologne duel, he had been caught searching his pockets for bubblegum to give German children. Fraternization was prohibited. Military police recorded his name, and his medal nomination was pulled. In September 2019, at the National World War II Memorial in Washington, author Adam Merkos arranged a surprise ceremony. Smoyer was 96. When he saw the setup, he smiled and said 2 words: Bronze Star. The rest of Eagle 7's crew received theirs posthumously. Smoyer wore the medal not for himself, he said, but for all the young boys who never got to live out their lives. He died in September 2022 at 99. He's buried in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Today, surviving Pershing stand at the Patton Museum at Fort Knox, the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts, the Royal Museum of Armed Forces in Brussels, and the Tank Museum in Bovington. One operational example still runs, a silhouette no one had seen before. That morning in Cologne, it bought Smoyer 3 seconds, and those seconds changed the future of American armour. The M26 Pershing, blocked, delayed, declared not battle-worthy. 20 reached Europe. They were enough. Do you think the Pershing would have changed the outcome in Normandy if it had arrived a year earlier? Or was the real failure the Doctrine that tried to make tanks avoid the fight entirely? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.